John and Melissa Harris seemed like the perfect couple, successful, respected, and deeply loved by their community. But behind closed doors, their marriage was crumbling under the weight of secrets, lies, and a deadly betrayal. What started as a hidden affair would spiral into a nightmare no one saw coming, one that ended in murder and shattered a family forever. To anyone looking in from the outside, the Harris family seemed to have it all. John Harris, a high school principal, was well-liked in the small town of Meadowbrook, Illinois. He was known for his calm demeanor, strong leadership, and commitment to education. His wife, Melissa, was equally admired. She ran a successful interior design business that catered to wealthy clients in the suburbs and had even been featured in a few local magazines. Together, they lived in a large, beautifully kept home on Maple Drive, with 2 children who were excelling in school and sports, and a golden retriever named Max, who completed the picture-perfect family image. Neighbors often spoke about how put together the Harrises seemed. They attended church on Sundays, hosted summer barbecues, and were regulars at town events. Their social media pages were filled with glowing family photos, vacations to Disney World, holiday dinners, and heartfelt anniversary posts that drew envy from friends and family alike. They were the kind of couple others admired, even idolized. But as with many things that look perfect on the surface, there was more to the story. What no one saw were the silent dinners, the closed doors, and the growing emotional distance between John and Melissa. The smiles and photos masked something much darker. Underneath the flawless appearance was a marriage slowly falling apart. Melissa, though outwardly cheerful, had become increasingly withdrawn. John, always calm and composed at work, had begun showing signs of stress and irritability at home. Still, there were no public fights, no police calls, nothing that would suggest something was deeply wrong. To the rest of Meadowbrook, they remained the perfect family. But inside their home, a storm was brewing, one that would eventually explode into a tragedy no one could have seen coming. The signs were subtle at first, easily missed by anyone not paying close attention. Melissa had started taking on more clients than usual, often working late into the night or leaving early in the morning for meetings out of town. She claimed her business was booming, and John believed her at first. She was ambitious, and success wasn't new to her. But the excuses became more frequent, and the explanations started to feel rehearsed. Melissa was suddenly unreachable during times she used to be available, and her once open phone was now locked and carefully guarded. John, a man who had always trusted his wife, started to grow suspicious. There were small inconsistencies, receipts from places she hadn't mentioned visiting, perfume on her clothes that wasn't her usual scent, and a hotel keycard tucked inside her purse. He didn't confront her immediately. Instead, he began watching her more closely, quietly gathering pieces of a puzzle he didn't want to complete. He checked her phone when she was asleep, followed her car a few times without her knowing, and even installed a tracking app under the guise of family safety. What he found crushed him. Melissa was having an affair. The man was Brian Keller, one of her new clients from a nearby city. He was older, married, and successful, a charming businessman who had clearly made an impression on her. John felt humiliated, betrayed, and completely blindsided. The woman he had built a life with, the mother of his children, was living a double life. But instead of confronting her or asking for a divorce, John's mind went to darker places. As the days passed, he became consumed with thoughts of revenge. Quietly, behind the smile he wore in public, something inside him began to break, and he started planning what would come next. It was a rainy Thursday evening in early October when Melissa Harris vanished without a trace. The last confirmed sighting of her was at a local grocery store around 5:30 p.m., picking up a few items: milk, bread, and flowers. She looked calm, even cheerful, exchanging a friendly wave with a cashier she'd known for years. By all appearances, it was just another ordinary day. She drove home in her white SUV, pulling into the driveway shortly before 7 p.m., as confirmed by a neighbor's security camera. But after that, she was never seen again. John told neighbors and friends that Melissa had gone to visit her sister in Michigan, needing time away to think. When people called her, The calls went straight to voicemail. Text messages were left unread. At first, no one panicked. Melissa was known to be independent and spontaneous. But as the hours turned into days, concern began to grow. Her sister eventually took to social media to ask if anyone had heard from her, clarifying that Melissa hadn't arrived and hadn't mentioned any plans to visit. The local police were alerted on the 5th day. When officers questioned John, he remained calm and cooperative. He told them that Melissa had packed a small bag and said she needed space. He added that she'd seemed distant in recent weeks and was probably taking time for herself. But something about his story didn't sit right with investigators. Melissa had left behind her purse, credit cards, driver's license, and even her phone charger. Her car was still in the garage, untouched. There were no travel bookings, no notes, no signs of a rushed departure. It was as if she had simply disappeared into thin air. And the deeper the police looked, the stranger it all became. As the investigation deepened, police quickly uncovered what John had tried so hard to hide: Melissa's affair with Brian Keller. It didn't take long to piece together. There were dozens of text messages, some romantic, others explicit. Phone records showed frequent late-night calls, and hotel bookings linked to Melissa's business trips lined up with Brian's schedule. The discovery shifted the focus of the case immediately. Brian became the prime suspect in Melissa's disappearance. Detectives brought Brian in for questioning. He admitted to the affair, but claimed he hadn't seen or spoken to Melissa in over a week. He said their relationship had recently cooled off and that they were taking time apart. His alibi was solid. He was home with his wife the night Melissa vanished. Surveillance cameras near his home confirmed it, and his cell phone data showed no movement outside his neighborhood during the crucial hours. Still, the affair had created a motive. Could Brian have wanted to end things, and Melissa didn't agree? Could he have lured her away, then silenced her permanently? Police searched his home, his office, and even questioned his wife. But nothing connected him directly to the disappearance. Everything pointed elsewhere. The attention gradually shifted back to John. At first, he was seen as the worried husband, the victim of betrayal. But the more investigators learned, the more his calm demeanor seemed off. He showed little emotion when discussing Melissa, and his answers were too polished, too rehearsed. And then came a critical development. A neighbor came forward with surveillance footage from the night Melissa disappeared, footage that would turn the case on its head. It was the first major break in what had become a haunting and confusing mystery, and it placed John exactly where he didn't want to be. The surveillance footage provided by a neighbor proved to be a game changer. Their home security camera, newly installed just weeks earlier, had a clear view of the Harris driveway. Investigators reviewed the footage from the evening of Melissa's disappearance, and what they found shattered John's carefully constructed timeline. At 6:47 p.m., Melissa was seen pulling into the driveway. She exited the vehicle carrying a grocery bag and a bouquet of flowers. She appeared relaxed and unaware of any looming danger. That was the last confirmed image of her alive. Crucially, no further footage showed her leaving the house, on foot, by car, or with anyone else. Hours passed without activity. Then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., the camera captured a much different scene. John was seen alone, dragging a large, awkwardly shaped object wrapped in a blue tarp down the driveway. He struggled to lift it, eventually managing to load it into the back of his SUV. The timing, the secrecy, and the object size immediately raised red flags. Investigators zoomed in and noted the glove John was wearing and the absence of any lights in the house or driveway. Clear signs he was trying not to be seen. When questioned, John claimed the object was old furniture he was getting rid of, something Melissa had asked him to donate. But his story didn't hold up. No donation centers had record of a drop-off, and John's SUV had been thoroughly cleaned the next day. That was enough to obtain a search warrant. The SUV was seized, and forensic investigators went to work. What they discovered inside the vehicle confirmed their worst fears. The beginning traces of a crime far more calculated and violent than anyone had imagined. The perfect husband was no longer above suspicion. He was now the prime suspect. The search of John's SUV uncovered more than just a suspiciously clean interior. It revealed a carefully concealed crime. Though John had scrubbed the vehicle thoroughly, forensic experts found faint traces of blood embedded deep within the carpet and tucked beneath the spare tire well. Using luminol, a chemical that reveals hidden bloodstains, investigators confirmed the presence of blood throughout the cargo area. Lab results later identified the blood as Melissa's. This discovery shifted the investigation from a missing person case to a homicide. The SUV wasn't the only place that raised concern. A thorough search of the Harris home revealed even more chilling evidence. In the basement, tucked behind storage bins and under old blankets, detectives found a claw hammer with what appeared to be dried blood and strands of hair stuck to its head. Though partially wiped clean, forensic analysis linked the biological material directly to Melissa. Even more disturbing were the signs of planning. Investigators discovered plastic sheeting, heavy-duty gloves, industrial cleaner, and unused zip ties in the garage. It became clear that the events of that night were not spontaneous. Melissa hadn't simply been attacked in a moment of rage. Someone had prepared for this. Still, John insisted he had no idea what happened to his wife. He denied everything, claiming the evidence was a misunderstanding or planted. But every test result, every inconsistency in his story, told a different tale. Without a body, the prosecution faced challenges. But the weight of the physical evidence was becoming overwhelming. Police were now certain Melissa was dead, and that John had killed her. What remained was the most important question of all. Where had he hidden her body? And why go to such lengths to cover it up? As the case against John Harris intensified, so did the pressure. He had gone from a respected principal and grieving husband to the central figure in a suspected murder. The evidence was stacking up, and the public was beginning to turn against him. For days, he maintained his innocence, insisting that he had no involvement in Melissa's disappearance. But behind closed doors, John was unraveling. Inside the interrogation room, his confident posture began to crack. He grew quiet, distant, and withdrawn. After several sleepless nights in a holding cell and hours of questioning, John finally broke. He asked to speak with detectives again, this time without his lawyer present. What followed was a chilling confession. John admitted that he had killed Melissa, but claimed it wasn't premeditated. He said they argued after he confronted her about the affair, and in a fit of rage, he grabbed a hammer and struck her. According to him, she fell and didn't get up. In his words, it was an accident, a moment of emotional collapse. He said he panicked, wrapped her body in a tarp, and hid it to protect their children and his career. But investigators didn't believe it. The presence of plastic sheeting, gloves, and cleaning supplies told a different story. The scene had been cleaned with precision. The hammer had been wiped down. There was no indication of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no blood trail. Everything pointed to a well-thought-out plan. Most troubling of all, John refused to say where he had hidden Melissa's body. Without it, prosecutors faced a major hurdle. A confession without a body would complicate the case in court. But detectives weren't giving up. They were convinced that the final piece of the puzzle was close, and they were right. Even after John's confession, the case remained incomplete. Without Melissa's body, prosecutors lacked the final, undeniable proof needed to secure conviction. Investigators were convinced she hadn't been taken far. John's calm, methodical nature didn't fit the profile of someone who would risk transporting a body across town. He was careful, calculated, and above all, he knew his own property inside and out. That's when detectives called in a cadaver dog to search the Harris home and surrounding yard. Inside the house, the dog showed no interest. But in the backyard, something changed. Near a recently landscaped flower garden in the far corner of the yard, the dog stopped suddenly. It sniffed intensely at the ground, circled twice, and then sat, an alert signal. Officers marked the area and called in a forensic excavation team. On the surface, the garden looked peaceful and well-kept. Rows of blooming mums had been neatly arranged. Decorative pavers created a perfect border. Melissa had redesigned that space just weeks earlier, making it even harder to accept what lay beneath. Using ground-penetrating radar, the team identified an unusual disturbance in the soil. Hours later, as they dug beneath the flowers and fresh topsoil, their worst fears were confirmed. Wrapped tightly in a blue tarp, bound with duct tape, was the body of Melissa Harris. Her remains were partially decomposed, but the injuries were unmistakable, multiple blunt force wounds to the skull. The medical examiner also found bruising around her wrists, consistent with restraints. Everything pointed to a premeditated killing. Not a moment of rage, but a carefully staged execution, followed by a calculated effort to hide the evidence in plain sight. The body in the backyard removed all doubt. John Harris hadn't lost control. He had planned everything. The trial of John Harris became one of the most talked-about cases in Illinois in over a decade. It gripped the town of Meadowbrook and captured national attention, not just because of the brutality of the crime, but because of who John was: a trusted educator, a respected community figure, and a father. The courtroom was packed every day, with neighbors, former colleagues, and even former students watching as the shocking details of the case unfolded. The prosecution laid out a clear and devastating timeline. They showed how John had discovered Melissa's affair and slowly unraveled, not in a burst of emotion, but with careful planning and chilling intent. The physical evidence, blood in the SUV, the murder weapon in the basement, the body buried beneath their own backyard garden, left little room for doubt. They argued that John couldn't handle the humiliation, the loss of control, or the public exposure of his wife's betrayal. So, he decided to eliminate the problem entirely. The defense tried to argue diminished responsibility, claiming John had suffered a mental breakdown triggered by emotional trauma. But the jury wasn't convinced. The cleaning supplies, the surveillance footage, the efforts to cover up the crime, it all pointed to premeditation, not a temporary lapse in judgment. After a 2-week trial, the verdict came swiftly. John Harris was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no outburst, no emotion, just silence. The once idyllic Harris home was sold within months. The children were taken in by relatives and moved out of state. What was once considered a picture-perfect family had been torn apart by secrets, betrayal, and a brutal act of violence that no one in Meadowbrook would ever forget.